Hello everyone, welcome back. Chef Josh Truitt here from IUP's Hospitality Management Department. Just doing another cooking video showing you how to make bread at home easily. Pretty popular thing right now, baking your own bread, making your own rolls. I'm going to do a recipe that I personally like. You can turn it into bread dough or it doubles as a pizza dough as well. So, to get started, go over our ingredients here. What you're going to need is 4 cups of flour, all-purpose or bread flour. I've got 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I've got a pack of active dry yeast. If you don't have the packets and you have like a jar of yeast, it's about 2.25 teaspoons per yeast packet. 1 1/3 cup water. And I also have a little bit of honey here, because when you're working with yeast, you're going to need warm water. My water is at like 110, 115 degrees. That's going to activate your yeast. You need that warm water so your bread starts to ferment and you get those nice bubbles and you're going to build flavor with your yeast. So it's really important you have it activated. If you use cold water, your bread won't rise. If you use water that's too hot, you'll kill your yeast and it again won't rise. And I'm also going to add the honey because yeast likes sugar. And if you add sugar to it, you add food for the yeast to eat, and it's going to produce more fermentation in your bread dough. So, we're going to put our water in our bowl that I have warmed with some hot running water as well, so I don't lose that temperature. And we're going to add our yeast. Whole packet right in there. And the honey, I'm going to use about 1 or 2 teaspoons. Doesn't take a lot. If you don't have honey, you can also add sugar. I just had honey laying around. I think it dissolves a little easier as well. So now, you can see our yeast is in there. We're just going to stir it around with a fork. Down off the sides, and then it's going to start working and fermenting. You'll know it's ready whenever it starts to bubble, and I'll show you that here real soon. You're going to let this sit for about 5 minutes, and you let your yeast activate. All right, and we're back now. Our yeast has been activating. You look in the bowl there, you see those little bubbles, like a little bit foamy, a little frothy. That means it's working. I'm gonna let that go just a few more minutes here. I'm gonna set that off to the side. And now when we do our flour, just sift it. Get all those lumps. I see that big lump in there. We don't want that. You don't want like pockets of flour in your bread and you bite into it and you just get dry flour and a piece of bread. It's not good. So you sift it. Make a nice smooth flour. You see all those little lumps just disappear right in to the bowl there. Nice light and fluffy. I also have a little bit of extra flour here just in case we need it when mixing. I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Now the recipe that I use says you only add it if you're making pizza dough. I have added it to the entire batch and made bread out of it, and I personally like how it turns out. I haven't noticed much of a difference, but it adds a little bit extra flavor, nice texture. Okay, so we have our yeast bloomed. We're going to put that in our mixer, and we are using the dough hook attachment. If you don't have one of these, you can mix it by hand. You're just going to have to do a lot of work kneading it. This recipe calls for kneading for about 12 minutes. So, this bowl is going to come in handy again. That's why I sifted my flour into it. And we'll see why here. So I'm going to add my flour to my yeast, water, and sugar mixture here. Make sure we get it all in there. bowl to the side. I'm going to use that after we mix it. Throw in our salt. Keep your mixer clean. Put this up, and we're just going to knead this with the dough hook. Slowly adding our olive oil. And we're just going to knead it on like a medium-low speed until a nice dough forms. It's going to take a little bit. It's going to look sticky at first, but it will come together into a dough ball eventually. You can see it's just working slowly. Turn it up to medium, a little bit higher. And you can see it starts coming into a dough ball. Now at this point, if it looks too dry or looks too wet after a few minutes of kneading, you can add your extra flour. Do a little splash of water in there to get the right consistency. But I'm going to let this go a little more. Let it come together. And we're just having a nice dough ball. Alright, so the dough's been kneading for about 4 or 5 minutes now in the mixer. Still a little bit sticky. I wanted to stop here and show you how you knead it by hand as well. Another reason you need your flour on the side. If you're doing that, you're going to dust your work surface with your bench scraper. If you have one of those or not, we're going to turn our dough out onto our floured work surface. Okay, so now we have the dough. It's a little shaggy, still a little sticky. I'm going to use that extra flour. I'm just going to knead it, pushing with your palm away from you, folding it, bringing it back around. Really, just going to knead it till you get a nice, smooth, uniform dough ball. It's not too sticky, not too dry. You can feel the texture of it. That's one big thing with bread is texture. You can tell if your dough, you can tell it just by looking at it a lot of times. Sometimes like now, this looks uniform, but it's still a little bit sticky. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more flour and just continue kneading it. Again, just working it, folding it over itself, bringing it back, just making sure you have a nice, smooth dough. No really wet or dry spots through it. See how it's nice and smooth and elastic. Just bring it back a little bit. Not much flour so my hands don't stick. Alright, so now I'm going to work this into a smooth dough ball. It's also a little stickier if you add the olive oil, so I've had to add some extra flour as opposed to the original recipe with 4 cups, 1 1/3 cups water, just for the traditional bread dough. So we've got it into our dough ball, nice and smooth. See how it springs back a little bit. This is where our bowl comes back in. So we measure our flour into it, and now we've got to transfer it to a lightly floured bowl. Look at that. You don't have to do extra dishes. You're going to put it in there. And this is going to be our first rise. This is where all our fermentation happens between the mixing process and the baking process. We're going to put this in a warm spot for 2 hours. Cover it with a kitchen towel. Or you can use, I use this bowl because it has a lid that fits on it, which will come in handy in the next fermentation process. But for now, I'm going to cover it with my kitchen towel, place it in a warm location, and we'll come back in 2 hours and we'll see what happened. Okay, so we waited 2 hours. Our dough has risen, as you can see. Got these bubbles in there. It's the fermentation in action. It's definitely at least doubled in size. Okay, so now we're going to take this, we're going to keep it in the bowl, and we're going to extend our fermentation time. We're going to do what is called a cold fermentation. That's why I like this bowl. Got the lid on it, tightly covered. You can cover it tightly in plastic wrap as well. Now we're going to let this sit in the fridge overnight and ferment in the fridge. It's still going to have that activity, but the cold temperature is going to slow it down. And you could punch this down, form it into your rolls or your dough, pizza dough, and use it right now. But I do a cold ferment for an extra like 24 hours, and it's going to really develop a lot more flavor in there. Let that yeast really go to work and just develop all those flavors. So we'll come back tomorrow, show you how to make some pizza, some rolls, maybe a little loaf of bread. Again, one dough, 2 or 3 different applications, anything you want with it. And we're back to bread. Had our dough cold rising in the refrigerator overnight. It's been about 24 hours, give or take a couple. Now, what we're going to do, turn this out onto our work surface. What we're going to do, punch it down. You can see how much volume it's losing. All those air pockets created by that yeast. Flour my hands a little bit. I'm going to show you a few techniques here. So remember how I said this is a bread and pizza dough. Okay. So flour our work surface, flour our hands, keep our dough from sticking too much. Now I've let it do the cold rise for about 24 hours. I brought it out. You want to let it come back up to room temperature before you work with it again. If it's too cold, it's going to be a pain to work with. It needs to be a little warm. It's still a little bit cold, but we should still be able to get what we need. So let it sit out for about an hour or two. Come back up to room temp before you start working with it again. So I'm going to show you how to make rolls and a bread loaf. Now you can use a bread pan. I do a freestanding loaf. I have a pizza stone in my oven that I do enjoy baking some stuff on. I'm going to switch this back over. I'm going to portion out rolls here first. I'm going to do 2-ounce rolls. Make sure we're on the right. These are the rolls we use in the Allenwood restaurant. Not this particular recipe, but I'll show you how we make those here real quick. Those of you that have been there and done that, you know how much fun that is. So, I'll show you our technique for Allenwood dinner rolls here. Got our portioned dough balls. It's important when you're baking to use a scale, measure everything out accurately. You want everything to be uniform, because when you're making rolls for a restaurant, you're probably not just going to make 2. You're going to be making dozens upon dozens, and you want them all to be the same size. That's why they have consistency when they bake. They're all going to be done at the same time, okay? Depending on your oven, sometimes your oven differs, but anyway, if you have them all the same size, they're all going to be done at the same time. We're going to bake these a little bit after we form them. I'm going to show you that technique here. We have our portioned dough balls. We're going to form them into rolls. Now, we floured our surface to keep our dough from sticking. But for this part, you don't really want too much flour because it's just going to slide around and it's going to be hard to work with. So you want your dough to be a little bit sticky. Work it into a ball first, and then we want to make a nice tight top here. It's going to be a nice smooth, even crust after we bake it. So we're going to form them into a ball using this motion. And you can see here, keeping pressure. You're going to like kind of push on the table and the dough, but constantly keeping your fingers moving around the dough and your hand in contact with it the whole time as you work your way around the ball of dough. And as you go, circular motion, you can see it start to tighten up. And then you can see the difference here. So this one's not quite as tight. This one had everything come together in the bottom. Nice, smooth, uniform dough ball. It's going to be a nice dinner roll. Set that off to the side. And do the same thing with the other one. Again, you can see how my hand never really leaves the dough. Just constantly working it in a circular motion. You see my fingers, my palm, my thumb, pinching the bottom of it against the table to get that nice, smooth, uniform roll. Okay, now we've let this rise overnight. We're also going to do another rise before it bakes. Isn't baking so much fun? It takes so much time, but the results are usually well worth the wait. So we're going to transfer these to a baking pan and let them double in size before we bake them. And I'll show you how to make a little bread loaf too. All right, now we made our 2 rolls. Have them on our tray. You're going to proof again. It's going to rise. And we have the rest of our dough. Like I said, this is a pizza and bread dough. So I'm going to weigh it. See how much it weighs here. 1 pound, 8 ounces. So I'm going to take off, let's see, 8 ounces. Save that for my pizzas. And we'll make a 1 pound bread loaf. There we go, 8.4. We're down to a pound, it should be. 0.1. There we go. Now we're going to save this for our pizza doughs. I'll show you how to stretch those too. Now, again, on our floured work surface, we have our bread dough. You can make it into a round loaf just like this. Let it proof. Just form it. Again, you can't really do the same thing you do with the rolls. You just use your hands to pinch the bottom together so you get that nice smooth crust. I like to do a loaf. I don't use a loaf pan. But you can just stretch it out a little bit. Almost like a baguette loaf. And we'll just roll it up. Now we've got some nice loaf. And tuck the ends in there. Make sure it's nice and even the whole way down. You got a loaf that we're going to put on our floured cutting board, or sheet tray, sorry. And we're going to let these proof again. A nice warm spot. Make a little smiley face. Okay. Then we're going to put these in a warm spot. Bring them over here. Cover them with a clean kitchen towel. And let them proof in a warm location. This is nice and warm by the stove. I have it preheating to 450 degrees to bake. And once they proof and double in size, we'll throw them on the pizza stone and bake them. Then we'll finish them with a little brush of butter and you have homemade bread and rolls. Now for the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm going to turn this into a pizza as well. So I had our 8 ounces of dough, and I portioned into 2 equal dough balls of 4 ounces. Now we got to turn it into a pizza crust. Now whether you like thin crust, thick crust, if you don't have a pizza stone, you can always bake it on a sheet tray, a baking sheet. You can put it into a cast iron skillet, maybe do a Chicago style deep dish. Who knows? Do whatever you want. It's pizza. It's supposed to be fun. Now we're going to roll it out into a dough. See, we have all of our ingredients ready over here. And do a basic pizza. Some tomato sauce, a little bit of cornmeal here. I'm going to put on our cutting board, which I'm using as my pizza peel to get it into the oven. And do some cherry tomatoes, a little bit of fresh mozzarella and soppressata. So, we've let our dough come back to room temperature. I'm going to start to slowly work it into a pizza shell. Working from the inside out, trying to keep it as circular and uniform as we can. If you need a little more flour on your workstation, do that. Get this rolled out to a little personal pizza. You know, it starts to stick. Now you can do this with your hands too. You just got to be careful. What you want to do, just like the back of your hands, and just start to form it. You can pull it. Maybe try and toss it. Just don't get it stuck to the ceiling. Okay, I'm going to roll this a little more. Stretch it. I prefer a thin crust pizza. It still needs to be thick enough to hold up to your toppings. So that's something to keep in mind as well. All right, got our pizza dough ready. Not sticking. Now, before we move on to toppings, I'm going to do cornmeal on the bottom. You can also use like semolina or just all-purpose flour if that's all you have. We're going to put this on our cutting board / pizza peel. If you don't have cornmeal, semolina, or don't have a pizza peel, just use all-purpose flour. Turn a baking sheet over on its back and do the same thing. Point of the is so your pizza does not stick to your cutting board, so you can get it off the cutting board onto your pizza stone if that is what you're using. Okay, so make sure that's moving around. Take our sauce, start from the middle and work out. Again, leaving a little border there for your crust. A little better than I did. Okay, I got our tomato sauce. I'm going to pull that piece in. Now, add some of our fresh mozzarella. You don't need to cover the entire pizza with cheese. It does go a lot further than you think, because as it melts, it's going to spread out over the whole pizza. Throw on some soppressata. Maybe we'll take some of these grape tomatoes. Give them a slice, toss them on there. You have fresh herbs. You can put those on as well if you'd like. Really anything. Pizza's yours. Okay, and you see we have all those toppings on there. Our pizza is still moving around easily. So we're going to bring it over to our preheated oven. So we have our pizza stone in there. And now this is where it comes in handy that you put the cornmeal on. Gonna take it, slide it right on there into your oven. And we're gonna bake it about 5 minutes. Okay, pizza ready to come off the stone. Here we go. About 5 or 6 minutes. You can see how that cheese really spread out there. Nice crispy crust. That. All right, let it cool down for a couple minutes. We'll cut into it. All right, your pizza's out of the oven. Listen to that crust. Super easy, super quick. Hardest part's waiting for the dough to ferment. Get you nice crispy crust from your pizza stone, your baking stone. You can get the same thing in a nice hot oven. You can go a little bit higher in the oven, 500 if you want. And then we're gonna cut into it. Get a little crispier crust. Nice, crunchy. There you go. Pizza. Still pretty solid. Not too much sauce, not too much cheese. You can see that little amount of cheese. The tomatoes are all falling off here. Using my soppressata. I'll get that back. But nice recipe for pizza crust bread dough. Hope you try it, make it, and we'll see how our rolls and bread turn out too. Let's check out this bread now. It's had time to rise. It's our secondary rise. Again, still just building on that fermentation. Everything between mixing the dough and baking it is the fermentation process, and you're building flavors, developing flavors. So we have our rolls over here. We're not going to do anything to those. They've proofed. Nice texture going to be inside of that. Nice airy. We've got our loaf here that we're going to score right on the top. This very sharp knife, barely putting any pressure on it. It's going to give us a nice crust, nice little presentation. I'm going to spritz it with a little bit of water here. If I can get my water bottle to work. This just helps get a nice crispy crust. All right, now these are going to go into our oven, preheated at 425 degrees. Gonna put them right on our baking stone. I could bake them right on this sheet tray, but I do prefer the crust you get and the texture from doing it right on a preheated baking stone. So you can see we've transferred our rolls and bread in there. Now the rolls, since they're smaller, are going to take less time to bake. I'm going to give those about 8 minutes before I check them for the first time. And then when they're about 3/4 of the way done, I'm going to melt a little extra butter. I'm going to use for my cinnamon rolls this morning. And we're going to give them a little brush of butter on the top to get that nice golden brown crust. It's been a few minutes. Take a quick peek at our bread. You can see it's still increasing in size as we bake it. All that air expanding on the inside. See our rolls are about halfway there. Okay, so it's taken a little while. About a day and a half to finish all this. You don't have to do it all at once. It's a nice thing about bread dough. Pizza dough, if you make your bread dough in advance, portion it out. If you want to do rolls, you can make rolls, portion them and freeze them. Pull them out, bring them back up to room temperature whenever you're ready to bake them. Same thing with the pizza dough. That's what I do. I usually make a batch of pizza dough, divide it into 4 to 6 balls of dough, pop them in the freezer, pull them out, let them come back up to room temperature, and then work pizza. Real simple. Hope you try it at home. If you've got flour, yeast, a little bit of water, you can make it. Touch of honey, sugar, anything. You can make it your own recipe. You can tweak it. So our rolls are done. Our loaf of bread, you see that nice crust on the bottom there? We get from that oven stone. Got our rolls. You can see this one, nice smooth upper crust. Again, we got that bottom crust there, nice and golden brown. I brush them with butter. Now, take it with that nice fluffy dinner roll. Make a nice little sandwich out of that. Put some butter on it. You can eat it. Also got our pizza here. Nice thin crust pizza. Switched it up a little bit. You can hear that nice crust up underneath. Nice evenly baked thin crust pizza. Did a little veggie pizza. Like I said, have fun with it. Bake. Try this out. Pretty easy. A little bit of time, a little bit of commitment, but well worth it in the end. Enjoy.